Hello, and welcome to the Sleon Productions podcast, where we interview authors, speakers, entrepreneurs. And today we have an author we actually had before a couple years ago. I don't have too many returning guests, but we have Nancy E. Head. She is the author. The first book that we interviewed her about was Restoring the Shattered, Illustrating Christ's Love Through the Church in One Accord. Now she has a new book which is a little bit different from the first one, but is called Wandering Swallow, a young girl's quest for freedom. And Nancy, welcome back to the Sleon Productions podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be back.
So, Nancy, we were talking about it before the podcast. I think we last spoke was 2019 when your first book came out. Can you tell us what's been happening since then?
Well, I started a middle grade book, which I think was my learning book with a couple of my granddaughter and other grandchildren got drawn into it. And that explains the nom de plume, Maliko Mathers is Neela Mathers' boys. So I just made a conglomeration of their names, and that's the nom de plume for this book. But I had a character in that book who had Down syndrome and was Korean. And I began to think about prequels. How did these kids end up in America in the 21st century? And I read a book about North Korea and I was off. And it wasn't just because of that. I honestly don't remember exactly what prompted me to say North Korea. I think I might have been teaching my AP language class, which is a rhetoric class. And I also had in my hand at the same time, I don't recommend that you read a book about North Korea and the reality of North Korea, along with Solzhenitsyn's Gulag Archipelago. It's way too depressing to do both of those at the same time. So I put the Gulag Archipelago with Eric Metaxas, so I got her book, and I began to understand a little bit of the history of how North Korea and South Korea came to be after World War II, and the Soviets are occupying the North and America the South. So in case you wondered how that happened, that's pretty interesting. But in 1995, what happened is when they divided the North and the South, all of the good growing land where you can plant crops and grow food, almost all of those are in the South. So they tried rice, corn, all kinds of potatoes, different crops. Nothing worked in the North. And when the economy tanked a little bit around 1995, other countries were unable to sustain to help North Korea. And so they had a famine and 1 million people died. So this story begins with a little girl and her uncle standing on the side, on the bank of the Amnok River, ready to cross into China. And once they get there, it's not like they can claim asylum and be safe. If I do not elaborate on at all, she could be married off to a Chinese man. I do say that people are looking, and there is a reference at the end to her being sold, which she does not understand. I mean, she understands the horror of it, but she doesn't understand the ramifications. I'm leaving that up to parents. But they have a journey through China. Their tour guide is a mysterious survivor of the Tiananmen Square massacre, which was 1989. He takes her to the square, explains who Tank Man was. If we recall, the guy who defied the row of tanks in 1989. So they go through, they go to Xi'an, and she learns about the terracotta soldiers. They go down to Changsha. They end up in Guangzhou. And then the goal without giving away the end, the goal is to go to Hong Kong, but they're time constrained because the Chinese will take over from Great Britain in 1997. So he's got a year to decide whether he's going to go or not. And the story is basically how this little girl ends up in America. But what happens to her grandfather and where are her parents? And what will happen to this mysterious guide with a big scar across his neck that people are hunting for him more than anything. So it's
Quite
a
interesting.
spiritual journey. I'm sorry.
Very
It's just,
spiritual journey. Yeah.
yeah, spiritual journey as well.
Yeah, and your previous book had a lot of Christian principles, and this book as well. How did you weave in biblical principles into this book?
Well, there's a lot of Christian symbolism when they first meet, when they sit down. They have a lady who's hosting them in a safe house, and when it's time to, this guest comes in, the mysterious man with the scar, and the woman sits down and lets the man serve her. That is not Asian culture, and of course, everyone here is Asian. So he's a Christ figure. He serves bread and water, and the water mysteriously turns purple, and it's quite the shock. They also how they got across the river. Not only was there a famine because of bad planning and crops and economic disturbance, there was also a great deal of rain that caused the river to be rushing. They aren't walking across this river, and they have the danger of being shot, but they also have this, nobody's walking across this river. The water's rushing too far. So there's this mysterious grandfather pushes her out into the bridge. She thinks they'll die and stop being hungry. And suddenly they're on solid ground, walking across the water. Not on the water, but there's some mysterious bridge here. So the guide did what many did after, or my fictional guide did what many Chinese did after Tiananmen Square. They had Confucianism, trusting and being led and respecting your elders and the leaders. And when the tanks came in and the soldiers with guns came in, they said, we have to find a savior. And Christianity exploded in China after Tiananmen Square. So he will explain that to her, that after that happened, we looked and we found Yesu. And we could go visit the underground church. And we also meet a couple who are realizing that they have to leave because they're about to give birth to an illegal child. And so I touch on that again without explaining what the ramifications would be if they got caught, because it is a book for kids, but just to let people know. They also explain that the baby is born with Down syndrome. And they explained that this child wouldn't get any medical care because of the Down syndrome, and on top of that, being an illegal baby. So these people have to get out too. And so there's an opportunity to talk about a lot of things that we're talking about, or that we should be talking about today. Number one, our faith, but two, the respect for the Imago Dei in a child, no matter how many chromosomes they have, and the contribution. There's another character who has Down syndrome who basically is the one who solves a couple of problems during his time with these characters. So to respect people and then celebrate the contributions that people can make, even though we who think we're the normal ones think maybe these people don't have contributions, and they do. So it was fun to do it, to give her this kind of Christ figure and to give her a lot of these combinations. But I want to keep the police on her heels, to keep the suspense going, to keep the reader wanting to turn the page, and not just feel like I'm being fed a bunch of dry history. I really wanted to make it a piece of literature, to put in literary devices and let the explanation of the history feel very natural.
Yeah, quite impressive. And you mentioned underground churches. That's a big thing in China, still is. And like you were saying, happened the whole incident back in the 1990s, still happening today. So it's quite impressive, the situation over there in East Asia. In your previous book, Restoring the Shattered, you explored Christ's love through the unity of the church. How does this book expand or differ from the themes you've explored in your previous book?
Well, there isn't any denominational discussion. And I have met a couple of people who were a few people who have been at Tiananmen Square and had conversations with them. And when I was writing the first book, I had the opportunity to be with a gentleman who uh, moved on from Tiananmen Square to become a pastor in America. And I asked him, denomination in China. He said, denomination doesn't mean anything in China. So it's to be a Christ follower is what matters. And it's very interesting. In the first book, I made a comparison between North and South Korea. Because in North Korea, you have 300,000 believers, about a third of them are in concentration camps. And in South Korea, you have a whole lot of churches, but you aren't seeing very many new converts. You're seeing sheep stealing going on. And not very many new souls coming to Christ. But in North Korea, there is only one hope in North Korea. The government controls literally how much you get to eat, and it isn't very much. Every night at least by 10 o'clock, all the lights, all the electricity in the entire country of North Korea goes out, except in Pyongyang, where the dictator lives. So, and if you're not on his side and in his good favor, you don't really get much to eat. Occasionally, someone will be chosen to be allowed to go to the border and visit their family that is in North Korea. And for 3 weeks, you get very good food so that people in South Korea don't realize how bad things are here. You don't get any, your cell phone can only work inside North Korea. There is somewhat of a black market, but they're very isolated from the rest of the world. They're subject to propaganda and they don't have a lot to eat. So, if you're a Christian in North Korea, you've picked your only hope and you are willing to pay the ultimate price if you step out of line. And it does happen.
Yeah, a lot of these stories I hear from communist countries all across the world, even Venezuela, been hearing the same thing: electricity, and you could get blacklisted by the government, maybe hunted, spied on. So a lot of pressure. We don't know what that is over here. Like
Right.
it's just not, just unheard of, but it happens in real life, and humanity is just, oh my gosh, it's just taken away. Nancy, so what message do you hope young readers or readers of any age take away from Hannah's story and her quest for freedom?
Well, first of all, to appreciate freedom, that it isn't, it is something we very much take for granted, um, that it comes through ultimately Christ. We're not free without Christ. And that is the big message. There are several others tucked inside there. Her grandfather, when they're going through China and people are teaching her Chinese language and Chinese culture, her grandfather is very careful to sit her down, and tell her, hang, remember Chosun, the name for North Korea, remember who you are. And he talked to her about what things were like. If we recall correctly, Korea was occupied by the Japanese during World War II, and they were not permitted to speak their language or wear traditional Korean clothing. So the idea of what it means to be Korean has been stripped away from them for so long. And he was hanging on to it to pass it on to her. There's also a character they visit who has an entire library of banned books that she has smuggled into to China. And she loved reading books in Korea, in North Korea, but they were controlled. They were only about the great leaders and how wonderful the great leaders were. And she's a little cynical about them because the one great leader said he would live forever, and he died last year and his son took over, and nobody could help with the famine. So, you know, why? So she's got a little cynical edge. But the banned books, there are students today who will graduate from high school never having read an entire book. There are people walking around in America today. The number of people who've never read a book is very high. Literacy is not great in the United States of America today. So I wanted to put a plug in for the importance of reading books, and the idea that that people will work to limit books. So I don't want to give away too much, but we have to leave the library behind at one point, and there's this question as to what's going to happen to all those books that somebody's worked very hard to bring this vast collection into China, where you can't just put a sign on the door and say there's a library here and come read. All the books that the only books in this library are books that have been banned either in China or outside of China. And the woman who has collected all these books comments, some of them by their own countries. And for example, like Solzhenitsyn, I didn't specifically put him on the shelf, but I imagine him being there. I put Mark Twain there. I put Uncle Tom's Cabin there. So I put Pilgrim's Progress there. So these are books that are picked off the shelf, and she gives little pieces of those. I hope that incites kids to read other books too.
Yeah, I mean, I remember in school, high school, middle school, I had to read tons of books, Nancy. Like I had
Yeah,
to read the whole Hobbit, and that's a long book.
I have it on the shelf here, and I have students who've read it. Yes.
And reading is so important. I read today. I mean, I took some time off reading maybe after college, to be honest, but I got back into reading this past couple years, and it does help you get you more knowledgeable and things like that. But no, this is quite interesting. Nancy, more on the personal side, how does your own faith influence your own writing process? I know these past two books, but how much has it influenced?
It can't help but speak. It's just there. And there are times too when you're writing, suddenly it takes this spiritual turn, and suddenly you have a character relying on God, looking to God, asking God for help, or exhibiting some Christ-like characteristic. And I don't think it can help but do that. It's just there. And speaking to kids and watching kids grow up and seeing the world uh, get harder for kids and more dangerous. We've had the district attorney come in and his assistant, who are both Christians in our county, and explain to kids what a couple of times they've been here explaining sex trafficking. And it happens in our, because you think, oh, that happens in Thailand or in North Korea or China. No, it happens right here. And they've tried cases here. And, so that kind of trying to help kids hang on to a little bit of innocence, which if you don't have Christianity, there isn't any of that. So that's really one of the most important things. Of course, seeing him work in my life, seeing God work in my life over the years, and looking back and in my own story of the faithfulness of God, there's not really any way to get around it. Over the last 5 years, to kind of catch you up, I retired from teaching at Penn State Altoona, and I teach full time now at Great Commission in Altoona, Pennsylvania. And so I have middle schoolers, and I started to bring my stories into the classroom. And And kids, I think, found a lot of engagement in that, and it helped them want to read more. And I also teach older kids, and I have advanced placement. I have a class of seniors, and I have a class of advanced placement juniors and seniors. And that getting deeper into literature, sometimes I can say, okay, now in my story, here's what I did, and then I can explain the literary device, and it's just a great deal of fun. I have had, let's see, six of my grandchildren in my classroom, and that's six of my 10 grandchildren. So it's a great joy, and between that and just watching grandkids come. I have three great granddaughters now. I think I had one the last time I talked to you.
Wow, Nancy, three already. That's
Yeah,
great.
well,
And you're so young still.
thank you. One mom and dad too. They had three, um, 6, 4, and a year and a half, almost a year and a half. So very close to that. So yes, we have been busy.
You could definitely, yeah, yeah, you got a lot going on, but I'm glad like the part where you're teaching your great grandkids and your grandkids as a blessing, and
Oh,
hopefully that blessing will be passed along to more generations.
the beauty of it is last year we became a 4 generation school where I am here. My son-in-law teaches English down the hall from me. My daughter is our drama director. She teaches drama and runs our award-winning plays. We had 5 awards in our regional awards show last year, an excellent program. And then we have 2 grandchildren still in school. One is a senior, one's a junior. And then our my great granddaughter. Last year there were 3. We had one who graduated, and my great granddaughter, the oldest one, came to kindergarten last year. She's in first grade. So we have four generations present at our school, and I think that's pretty rare.
I would say so as well. Nancy, you got 2 books already down. Are you thinking about a third one?
Yes, and I've started it. It is about Ireland. I love Ireland, and I've been to China 3 times. I love China. I love Chinese people. Going to Ireland feels like I'm going home, especially Northern Ireland. I'm not sure why, but when my husband, when he retired, he wanted to go on a trip, and we found out how much it cost to go to Italy, and then we said, let's go to Scotland and Ireland. So can't afford to go to Italy. And so he wanted to go to Scotland. He was thinking that was his family heritage. And I just remember, my father had, and both my father and mother have Irish heritage, but I remember watching the Troubles on television, watching IRA people, some of them very nasty people have done very nasty things, but some of them just wanting to be free from the British, and just remembering the smoke from whatever was going off, and people running down the street and things. I remember that on Walter Cronkite and the CBS Evening News when I was a kid. When we went from Scotland to Ireland to Belfast, I had the most overwhelming sense that I was going home. And this year, when I got there, I went on a mission trip with YWAM this year. And when I got to Dublin and got off the plane, I said to somebody, I think it was the customs guy or somebody checking my passport, I'm Irish. And he said, well, welcome home then. And so I'm thinking that there is a lot of interesting things about Ireland and World War II, which I never realized. They stayed neutral. The Germans had helped Ireland with their fight against the British. Was they were fighting for independence only 19 years earlier. They were very suspect of the British coming in trying to take over again. They did not accept Jewish refugees, so which I was disappointed to hear, but America didn't either when we had an opportunity. but my characters will find. Did you know, this is the most fascinating, I think, Americans actually sneaked into Canada so they could sign up for the Royal Air Force and fight for the British
I did not
before
know
we
that.
got into the war. There were Americans fighting on behalf of the British. So I'm going to take one of these Yanks and land him on the beach and have a couple of Irish blokes find him and a couple of Irish lads find him, and but they have to hide him because he's helping the British. And then what we're going to uncover will be this underground network of people um, who are looking to help the British and help there will be some Jewish children hidden in the village as well. And we'll be helping them and just again, character growth through trying to do the right thing. And I think that that's probably going to be the theme for that. I'm very excited about. I love Ireland, and I just sent for a book of Irish stories that for one of my characters to kind of glean from, and because the storytelling is very big in Ireland. So, and I want to make sure that I'm telling authentic story, not to borrow them, but to make them my own and let them be this character's own story, but to make them feel authentic to Irish readers.
Looking forward to it. My mother has been in most of Europe, and her favorite country that she's visited it was also Ireland.
Ireland is so beautiful. They're having a lot of the same problems we're having right now. Dublin is having a lot of immigration issues and a lot of crime issues, and but I was in this little uh, tiny. I was in this tiny village in northern, just across the border. You could look across the water and see Ireland from Northern Ireland, and it was spectacular. Even though I was there to work, and I did, but it was so it's such a different pace too. We Americans can very well learn, and I do my pacing issues are my own, of wanting to do everything. But
Multitasking.
over there, when I worked, and when I didn't, I rested and kind of indulged myself and walked into the village and walked beside the water and very contemplative time. I didn't have a television, which was great, but I did have a phone that I kept up with. It was a couple of weeks after the attempt on Mr. Trump, and it was while I was there was when the Democrats switched their candidate out. So I managed to, and it was interesting to read the feedback from that in the Irish newspapers as well. So Ireland is our next stop. I haven't quite decided exactly which character in my original book will be descended from this young man in Ireland, but it'll be a grandfather of one of my other characters, which I'll get around to rewriting that. I hope someday, Lord willing. And yeah, so we'll have a few. Might go somewhere else in the world after that too, but maybe actually to Italy. But I don't know. We'll see.
How can people find more information, and how can they pre-order?
Wandering Swallow, it was code for the Tiananmen Square dissidents trying to get out for Operation Yellowbird, which is a whole bunch of people from the church and the Hong Kong mafia, and not America, although we got accused, sadly, not America, trying to get these dissidents out to get them to safety. And it was called Operation Yellowbird. But it will be on Amazon. I'm excited. It's at the publishers, and they said, we have to get through this week, and then things will move very quickly. So I'm very excited. I thank you so much for this opportunity.
No, no problem, Nancy Head. I loved your our first interview back a couple of years ago, and I'm glad you reached out again. You're welcome anytime to my podcast, and probably get that third book out. But guys, check out Pondering Swallow:
Wandering
A Young
Swallow.
Girl's Quest for Freedom, by Nancy E. Head. Looking forward to it, and I really appreciate you coming on to the Sleon Productions podcast.
Thank you so much. And God bless you, Santiago.
Thank you.